Hey, Red Maple Grove, how you doing? Thanks for stopping by. How's your night going? Just trying to find a book to throw on real quick.
Chapter 1 of Creepy Tales by Edgar Allan Poe. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit
Oh, rainy.
LibriVox.org.
Oh, shit.
Recording by Anne Boulay. Creepy Tales by Edgar Allan Poe. The Telltale Heart. True, nervous, very, very dreadfully nervous I had been and am. But why will you say that I am mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them.
Chapter 2 of Creepy Tales by Edgar Allan Poe. This is a LibriVox recording.
Don't
All
really
LibriVox
like the
recordings are in the public
narrators on
domain.
these ones.
For more information or to volunteer, please.
Story 1 of 6 Creepy Stories by Edgar Allan Poe.
There we go. That one's a little
This
bit better.
is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain.
Over here, well, it was windy. Now it's gotten kind of chilly.
LibriVox.org. Recording by Phil Chabert. The Telltale.
It was really hot, or not hot, but warm
True.
a couple of days ago.
Very
And all of a sudden we get real cold.
I had been and am.
What's up?
But why will you say that I am
What?
mad? The disease had sharpened.
Hey, Southsider, how you doing?
Not destroyed. I told them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heaven and
This here's Damien.
I heard many things in hell. How then am I
This
mad?
one is
Hearken
most hated dog.
healthily. How calmly I could tell you the whole story.
He only comes in here once
It
to go
is
outside.
impossible to say how
Oh, shit,
firstly I
Alabama.
entered my brain.
Yeah, I'm in
I once conceived
New
of
Mexico.
Day and night. Object there was.
Are you
none.
tired, Southsider?
Passion, there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold, I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. He had the eye of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it.
You know what?
Whenever it fell
Let me
upon
start
my
off with a
blood ran cold.
dab for my nectar
And
collector.
so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man and thus rid myself of the
Two
eye
different kinds.
forever. Now, this is the point. You
This one
fancy
right
me
here
mad,
is some
and
grape
know
ape,
nothing,
sugar,
but you should have seen me.
and then some
You
shatter.
should have seen how wisely I proceeded, with what caution,
Oh shit.
what foresight.
Damn, I'd be tired
with
too.
what dissimulation I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every night about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and
Oh shit, 6 bags of groceries, that's crazy.
And when I had
Right,
made everything sufficient
Red
for my
Maple
head,
definitely dabs up.
a dark
I was got a
all
little
closed,
torch for my nectar collector.
but no light shone out. And then I thrust in my head. Oh,
I
you
never tried it before.
laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved it slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my
Takes a
hand
little bit to
within
get
the
warmed up
opening
enough.
so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Ah, would a madman have been so wise as this? And then, when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously So cautiously, for the hinges creaked, I undid it just so much that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye. And I did this for 7 long nights, every night, just at midnight. And finally I always did it, and so impossible to do, for it was not the old man who vexed me, but and every morning when the day broke, I went boldly
Hell yeah,
to the
cider.
door,
Definitely
spoke
appreciate it,
courteously
bro.
to him, calling him by name, and telling him how he had passed the night.
No, it's not really like
So,
hash.
you
It's
see, he would have been a very profound old
a little
man
more stronger
indeed.
than what hash
I
is.
suspect that every night, just at 12, I looked in upon him while he slept. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than did mine.
Ready to go outside? Let's go.
Never before that night
Be right
had
back. I
felt
can go
the
let him
extent
outside
of
real
my
quick.
own powers, of my sagacity. I could hardly contain my feeling of triumph to think there I was, opening the door little by little, and he not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea, and perhaps he heard me, for he moved on the bed suddenly as if startled. Now you may think that I drew back, but no. His room was as black as pitch with a thick darkness, for the shutters were close fastened through fear of robbers, and so I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it on steadily. I had my head in and was about to open the lantern when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening, and the old man sprang up in bed, crying out, "Who's there?" I kept quite still and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in the bed, listening, just as I have done night after night, marking watches in the wall. Presently I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not the groan of pain or of grief. Oh no, it was the low, stifled
How's everyone's
sound
night going?
that rises from the bottom of the soul when it's charged with awe. I knew the sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it has welled up from my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo the terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt, and pitied him, although I chuckled at heart. I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise, when he had turned in the bed. His fears had been ever since growing upon him. He had been trying to fancy them causeless, but could not. He had been saying to himself, "It is nothing but the wind in the chimney. It is only a mouse crossing the floor." Or, "It is merely a cricket which has made a slight chirp." Yes, he had been trying to comfort himself with these suppositions, but he had found all in vain. All in vain, because death, in approaching him, had stalked with his black shadow before him, and enveloped the victim. And it was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he neither saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room. When I had waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a very little crevice of the door. So I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily, until at last a simple dim ray, like the thread of the spider, shot from out the crevice and fell full upon the vulture eye. It was open, wide, wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctness, all a dull blue with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow of my bones. But I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray as if by instinct precisely upon the damned spot. And have I not told you that what you mistake for madness is but over acuteness of the sense? Now, I say, there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury, as the beating of a drum stimulates the soldier into courage. But even yet, I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could maintain the ray upon the eye. Meantime, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say, louder every moment. Do you mark me well? I have told you that I am nervous. So I am. And now, at the dead hour of the night, amid the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable terror. Yet for some minutes longer I refrained and stood still. But the beating grew louder. I thought the heart must burst, and now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once, only once. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him. I then smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes, the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It could not be heard through the wall. At length, it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there many minutes. There was no pulsation. He was stone dead.
Hey, Hilltop family, how you doing?
No,
Thanks for stopping by.
if you still think me mad, you will think so when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily.
Now, how's your night going, Hilltop family?
First of all, I dismembered.
Hope everyone's night's going good. Everyone's staying safe.
I then took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited all between the scantlings. I then replaced the boards so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatever. I had been too wary for that. A tub had caught all. Ha ha! When I had made an end of these labors, it was 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight. As the bell
That's
sounded
good.
the hour, there came a
Good to
knock
hear,
at the
Hilltop
street
family.
door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what had I now to fear? There entered 3 men who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbor during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police office, and they, the officers, had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled, for what had I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man I mentioned was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat while I answered cheerily. They chatted of familiar things. But ere long I felt myself getting pale and wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears. But still they sat and still chatted. The ringing became more distinct. It continued and became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and gained definiteness, until at length I found that the noise was not within my ears. No doubt I now grew very pale, but I talked more fluently and with a heightened voice. Yet the sound increased, and what could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, much such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I arose and argued about trifles in a high key and with violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited to fury by the observations of the men, but the noise steadily increased. Oh, God! What could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore. I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting, and grated it upon the boards, but the noise arose over all and continually increased. It grew louder, 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 and still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God! No, no! They heard, they suspected, they knew that they were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I think, but anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die, and now, again, hark, louder, 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 louder. Villains, I shrieked, dissemble no more. I admit the deed. Tear up the place. Here, here, it is the beating of his hideous heart. End of The Telltale Heart. Story number
Section 1 of Myths and Legends. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Myths and Legends of Ancient Greece and Rome by E.M. Behrens. The want of an interesting work on Greek and Roman mythology, suitable for the requirements of both boys and girls, has long been recognized by the principals of our advanced schools. The study of the classics themselves, even where the attainments of the pupil have rendered this feasible, has not been found altogether successful in giving to the student a clear and succinct idea of the religious beliefs of the ancients, and it has been suggested that a work which would so deal with the subject as to render it at once interesting and instructive would be hailed as a valuable introduction to the study of classic authors, and would be found to assist materially the labors of both master and pupil. In endeavoring to supply this want, I have sought to place before the reader a lifelike picture of the deities of classical times as they were conceived and worshipped by the ancients themselves, and thereby to awaken in the minds of young students a desire to become more intimately acquainted with the noble productions of classical antiquity. It has been my aim to render the legends, which form the second portion of the work, a picture as it was arrested in their course, and of the mountains being moved by the sweet tones of his voice.
Section 2 of Myths and Legends. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Myths and Legends of Ancient Greece and Rome by E.M. Behrens. Second Dynasty. Cronus, Saturn. Cronus was the god of time in its sense of eternal duration. He married Rhea, daughter of Uranus, and Gaia, a very important divinity to whom a special chapter will be devoted hereafter. Their children were 3 sons, Aedes, Pluto, Poseidon, Neptune, Zeus, Jupiter, and 3 daughters, Hestia, Vesta, Demeter, Ceres, and Hera, Juno. Cronus, having an uneasy conscience, was afraid that his children might one day rise up against his authority, and thus verify the prediction of his father Uranus. In order, therefore, to render the prophecy impossible of fulfillment, Cronus swallowed each child as soon as it was born, greatly to the sorrow and indignation of his wife Rhea. When it came to Zeus, the 6th and last, Rhea resolved to try and save this one child at least, to love and cherish and appeal to her parents, Uranus and Gaia, for counsel and assistance. By their advice, she wrapped a stone in baby clothes, and Cronus, in eager haste, swallowed it without noticing the deception. The child, thus saved, eventually, as we shall see, dethroned his father Cronus, became supreme god in his stead, and was universally venerated as the great national god of the Greeks. Anxious to preserve the secret of his existence from Cronus, Rhea sent the infant Zeus secretly to Crete, where he was nourished, protected, and educated. A sacred goat called Amalthea supplied the place of his mother by providing him with milk. Nymphs called Melissae fed him with honey, and eagles and doves brought him nectar and ambrosia. See footnote 4. He was kept concealed in a cave in the heart of Mount Ida, and the curates, or priests of Rhea, by beating their shields together, kept up a constant noise at the entrance, which drowned the cries of the child, and frightened away all intruders. Under the watchful care of the nymphs, the infant Zeus throve rapidly, developing great physical powers, combined with extraordinary wisdom and intelligence. Grown to manhood, he determined to compel his father to restore his brothers and sisters to the light of day, and is said to have been assisted in this difficult task by the goddess Metis, who artfully persuaded Cronus to drink a potion which caused him to give back the children he had swallowed. The stone which had counterfeited Zeus was placed at Delphi, where it was long exhibited as a sacred relic. Cronus was so enraged at being circumvented that war between the father and son became inevitable. The rival forces ranged themselves on 2 separate high mountains in Thessaly, Zeus with his brothers and sisters, took his stand on Mount Olympus, where he was joined by Oceanus and others of the Titans who had forsaken Cronus on account of his oppressions. Cronus and his brother Titans took possession of Mount Othrys and prepared for battle. The struggle was long and fierce, and at length Zeus, finding that he was no nearer victory than before, bethought himself of the existence of the imprisoned
Dude, 1
giants,
second, we're gonna
and
see what
knowing
they're
that they
barking
would
at
be
real
able to
quick.
render him most powerful assistance, he had hastened to liberate them. He also called to his aid the Cyclops, sons of Poseidon and Amphitrite, who had only one eye each in the middle of their foreheads, and were called Brontes, thunder, Sterops, lightning, and Pyracmon, fire anvil. They promptly responded to his summons for help, and brought with them tremendous thunderbolts, which the Hecatoncheires, with their 100 hands, hurled down upon the enemy, at the same time raising mighty earthquakes, which swallowed up and destroyed all who opposed them. Aided by these new and powerful allies, Zeus now made a furious onslaught on his enemies, and so tremendous was the encounter that all nature is said to have throbbed in accord with this mighty effort of the celestial deities. The sea rose mountains high, and its angry billows hissed and foamed. The earth
They were
shook
just
its
barking to be
foundations.
let back in
The
because
heavens
it's cold
sent
out
forth
there.
rolling thunder, and flash after flash of death-bringing lightning, whilst a blinding mist enveloped
It got
the
cold
rocks
up to where it
and
made
his
our
allies.
heater pop on.
And now the fortunes of war began to turn, and victory smiled on Zeus. Cronus and his army
Hope everyone's
were
staying warm
completely
wherever
overthrown.
they're at.
His brothers dispatched to the gloomy depths of the lower world, and Cronus himself was banished from his kingdom and deprived forever of the supreme power, which now became vested in his son Zeus. This war was called the Titanomachia. and
Hey,
is most
Ginger
graphically
Paranormal, how you
described
doing?
by the old classic
Thanks for
poets.
stopping by.
With the defeat of Cronus and his banishment from his dominions, his career as a ruling Greek divinity entirely ceases. But being like all the gods, immortal, he was supposed to be still in existence, though possessing no longer either influence or authority, his place being filled to a certain extent by his descendant and successor Zeus. Cronus is often represented as an old man leaning on a scythe, with an hourglass in his hand. The hourglass symbolizes the fast fleeting
I
moments
hope you're doing
as they
good
succeed
tonight.
each other unceasingly. The scythe is emblematical of time.
Oh, I'm
which
not
goes
doing
down
too
long
bad.
before it.
Just chilling.
Saturn. The Romans, according to
Smoking
their
and
custom of identifying their
chilling.
deities with those of the Greek gods whose attributes were similar to their own, declared Cronus to be
Or listening
identical
to a
with
book,
their
in
old
other, or
agricultural
in
divinity,
other words,
Saturn.
too.
They believed that after his defeat in the Titanomachia and his banishment from his dominions by Zeus, he took refuge with Janus, king of Italy, who received the exiled deity with great kindness and even shared his throne with him. Their united reign became so thoroughly peaceful and
Hell
happy,
yeah.
and was distinguished by such uninterrupted prosperity that it was called the Golden Age. Saturn is usually represented bearing a sickle in the one hand and a wheat sheaf in the other. A temple was erected to him at the foot of the Capitoline Hill, in which were deposited the public treasury and the laws of the state. Rhea, Ops. Rhea, the wife of Cronus and mother of Zeus, and the other Greek gods of Olympus, personified the earth and was regarded as the great mother and unceasing producer of all plant life. She was also believed to exercise unbounded sway over the animal creation, more especially over the lion, the noble king of beasts.
Probably shouldn't have
Rhea
topped
is
that bowl with
generally
some wax,
represented
too.
wearing a crown of turrets or towers and seated on the throne, with lions crouching at her feet. She is sometimes depicted sitting in a
Topped her with
chariot
some
drawn by lions.
wedding cake.
The principal seat of her worship, which was always of a very riotous character, was at Crete. At her festivals, which took place at night, the wildest music of flutes, cymbals, and drums resounded, whilst joyful shouts and cries, accompanied by dancing and loud stamping of feet, filled the air. This divinity was introduced into Crete by its first colonists from Phrygia in Asia Minor, in which country she was worshipped under the name of Cybele. The
One
people
side
treat
some
and
shatter
honor
and
as
the other
Great
side
Mother,
Well, that's
or
the
especially
shattering.
in her signification as the sustainer of the vegetable world.
This one's some
Seeing, however, that year
grape
by
ape.
year, as winter appears, all her glory vanishes, her flowers fade, and her trees become leafless.
Hey,
and
Anthony, how you
poetically
doing, bro?
express this process of nature under the
All right, since
figure
you're here,
of
I'll do a
lost
dab.
love. She was said to have been tenderly
It's some
attached to a youth of
grape
remarkable
ape
beauty
and some shatter.
named Aetus, who, to her grief and indignation, proved faithless to her. He was about to unite himself to a nymph called Sagaris, when, in the midst of the wedding feast, the rage of the incensed goddess suddenly burst forth upon all present. A panic seized the assembled guest, and Aetus, becoming afflicted with temporary madness, fled to the mountains and destroyed himself. Cybele, moved with sorrow and regret, instituted a yearly mourning
It just
for his
took me a
loss,
little bit to
when
get
her priests, the Corybantes, with their usual
my nectar
noisy
collector
accompaniments, marched into the
heated up.
mountains
It's a
to
thick
seek
one.
the lost youth.
And
Having
my
discovered
torch
him,
is
they gave full vent to their ecstatic delight by indulging in the most violent gesticulations, dancing, shouting, and at the same time wounding and gashing themselves in a frightful manner. See footnote 6. Ops. In Rome, the Greek Rhea was identified with Ops, the goddess of plenty, the wife of Saturn, who had a variety of appellations. She was called Magna Mater, Mater Diorum, Berecynthia Aegea, and also Dindymene. This other title she acquired in the very high mountains in Phrygia, whence she was brought to Rome as Cybele during the Second Punic War, BC 205, in obedience to an injunction contained in the Sibylline books. She was represented as a matron crowned with towers, seated in a chariot drawn by lions. Vision of the world. We will now return to Zeus and his brothers, who, having gained a complete victory over their enemies, began to consider how the world which they had conquered should be divided between them. At last it was settled by lot that Zeus should reign supreme in heaven, whilst Hades governed the lower world, and Poseidon had full command over the sea. But the supremacy of Zeus was recognized in all three kingdoms, in heaven, on earth, in which of course the sea was included, and under the earth. Zeus held his court on the top of Mount Olympus, whose summit was beyond the clouds. The dominions of Hades were the gloomy unknown
You know what?
regions
I'm
below
gonna
the
change
earth,
the book real
and
quick.
Poseidon reigned over the sea. It will be seen
They may or may not get a copyright for this one.
He remained atop.
This is Audible.
Audio Renaissance presents The Eye of the World by Robert Jordan. Read for you by Kate Redding and Michael Kramer.
Prologue.
How ya, Ginger?
Dragon Mount. The palace still shook occasionally as the earth rumbled in memory, groaned as if it would deny what had happened. Bars of sunlight cast through rents in the walls made motes of dust glitter where they hung in the air. Scorch marks marred the walls, the floors, the ceilings. Broad black smears crossed the blistered paints and gilt of once bright murals. Soot overlaying crumbling friezes of men and animals, which seemed to have
Hey,
adapted to
Shorts, how
walk
you
before
doing?
madness grew quiet. The dead lay everywhere. Men and women and children struck down in attempted flight by the lightnings that had
How you
flashed
been
down
doing,
every
Shorts?
corner, or seized by the fires that had stalked them, or sunken into stone of the palace, the stones that had flowed and sought, almost alive, before stillness came again. In odd counterpoint, colorful tapestries and
Wait
paintings,
1 second, everyone. Gotta see what the
masterworks
dogs are
all,
whining
hung
about.
undisturbed, except where bulging walls had pushed them awry. Finely carved furnishings, inlaid with ivory and gold, stood untouched, except where rippling floors had toppled them. The mind twisting had struck at the core, ignoring peripheral things. Luz Therin Telamon wandered the palace, deftly keeping his balance when the earth heaved. Ilyena, my love, where are you? The edge of his pale gray cloak trailed through blood as he stepped across the body of a woman, her golden hair
No
beauty
stress.
marred by the horror of her
What you
last
stressed
moments.
about,
Her
shorts?
still open eyes frozen in disbelief. Where are you, my wife? Where is everyone hiding? His eyes caught his own reflection in a mirror hanging askew from bubbled marble. His clothes had been regal once, in gray and scarlet and gold. Now the finely woven cloth
No shit, keep
brought
getting
by merchants
booted.
from across the
That
world
sucks,
sea
bro.
was torn and dirty, thick with the same dust that covered his hair and skin. For a moment he fingered the symbol on his cloak. A circle, half white and half black, the colors separated by a sinuous line. It meant something, that symbol, but the embroidered circle could not hold his attention long. He gazed at his own image with as much wonder. A tall man, just into his middle years, handsome once, but now with hair already more white than brown and a face lined by strain and worry, dark eyes that had seen too much. Lews Therin began to chuckle, then threw back his head. His laughter echoed down the lifeless halls. Ilyena, my love, come to me, my wife. You must see this. Behind him, the air rippled, shimmered, solidified into a man who looked around, his mouth twisting briefly with distaste. Not so tall as Lews Therin, he was clothed all in black, save for the snow-white lace at his throat and the silver work on the turned-down tops of his thighs.
Oh, my vest, yeah.
He stepped carefully, handling his cloak fastidiously to avoid brushing the dead.
That's a lot of
The floor trembled with
timing in
His
patches.
attention was fixed on the
'Cause
man
it's
staring
front,
in the mirror and laughing.
The sides, the back, of
Good
course.
morning, he said. I have come for you. They're cut off as if it had never been. And Lews Therin
I got
seeming
a pair of
unsurprised.
shorts that I have all kinds of patches on.
Guest.
And then I have
Stranger,
another vest over here that I'm working on with patches.
and here all are welcome to take part. Ilyena, my love, we have a guest. Ilyena, where are you? The black-clad man's eyes widened, darted to the body of the golden-haired woman, then back to Lews Therin. Shaitan,
Pretty much all that, I pretty much hand stitched all that.
that name, Shai. Lews Therin shuddered and raised a hand as though to ward off something. You mustn't say that name. It is dangerous. So, you remember that much at least. Dangerous for you, fool. Not for me. What else do you remember? Remember, you light-blinded idiot? I will not let it end with you swaddled in unawareness. Remember!
I think on one of my videos I have on my
Lews Therin
page
stared at his raised hand.
is
puzzled by the
actually,
patterns of grime.
what doesn't show the whole process, shows, I have pictures, a little video of clips of
Who are you?
me setting the patches on with the
The black-clad man
safety
threw
pins
himself
of
up
where I
there.
want them. I show that
Once I was
picture,
told, and
like
I
having them all up that way,
get
or
on.
video, and
But now,
the other half of the video is the finished product of it.
it was a whisper from Lews Therin. Memory stirred. He
Because
turned
I
his head,
use
shying away from it.
dental floss
do
to
remember
do all
some
my stitch work.
things. Yes, betrayer of hope. So have men named me. just
And
as
I
they named
got a
Luke
pair of
Dragon.
pants
But
that I
unlike
have
you,
all
I
patched
embrace
up
the
front
name.
and back.
They gave me the name to revile me, but I will yet make them kneel and worship it. What will you do with your name? After this day, men will call you
See if I
Kinslayer.
can't find it.
What will you do with that? Lews Therin frowned down the ruined hall. Ilyena should be here to offer a guest welcome, he muttered absently, then raised his voice. Ilyena, where are you? The floor shook. The golden-haired woman's body shifted as if in answer to his call. His eyes did not see her. Elan Morin grimaced. Look at you, he said scornfully. Once you stood first among the servants. Once you wore the ring of Temelin and sat in the high seat. Once you summoned the 9 rods of dominion.
Mine's more of
Now
a punk rocker vest.
wretch. But it is
I used
not
to
enough.
hop freight
You
trains
humbled me in the hall
and
of
hitchhike.
servants. You defeated me at the gates.
Hey,
of
Migs,
Arden.
how you doing? But that link right there, that's to the video of
I will not let you die
the pair of
without
shorts
knowing
I did.
that.
Released
When
that.
you die, your last thought will be the full knowledge of your defeat.
At least the first
How
half of them.
complete and utter it is. If I let you die at all. I cannot imagine what is keeping Yelena. She will give me the rough side of her tongue if she thinks I have been hiding a guest from her. I hope you enjoy conversation, for she surely does. Be forewarned. Yelena will ask you so many questions, you may end up telling her everything you know. Tossing back his black cloak, Ilan Morin flexed his hands. A pity for you, he mused, that one of your sisters is not here. I was never very skilled at healing, and I follow a different
How you been
power
doing,
now.
Migs?
But even one of them could only give you a few lucid moments if you did not destroy her first. What I can do will serve as well for my purposes. His sudden smile was cruel. But I fear Shaitan's healing is different from the sort you know. He extended his hands, and the light dimmed as if a shadow had been laid across the sun. Pain blazed in Luz Theron, and he screamed a scream that came from his depths, a scream he could not stop. Fire seared his marrow, acid rushed along his veins. He toppled backwards, crashing to the marble floor. His head struck the stone and rebounded. His heart pounded, trying to beat its way out of his chest, and every pulse gushed new flame through him. Helplessly he convulsed, thrashing, his skull a sphere of purest agony on the point of bursting. His hoarse screams reverberated through the palace. Slowly, ever so slowly, the pain receded. The outflowing seemed to take 1,000 years and left him twitching weakly, sucking breath through a raw throat. Another 1,000 years seemed to pass before he could manage to heave himself over, muscles like jellyfish, and shakily push himself up on hands and knees. His eyes fell on the golden-haired woman, and the scream that was ripped out of him dwarfed every sound he had made before. Tottering, almost falling, he scrabbled brokenly across the floor to her. It took every bit of his strength to pull her up into his arms. His hands shook as he smoothed her hair back from her staring face. Ilyena, light, help me! Ilyena! His body curved around hers protectively, his sobs the full-throated cries of a man who had nothing left to live for. Ilyena, no! No! You can have her back, Kinslayer. The great Lord of the Dark can make her live again, if you will serve him, if you will serve me. Luz Theron raised his head, and the black-clad man took an involuntary step back from that gaze. 10 years, betrayer, Luz Theron said softly, the soft sound of being bared. 10 years your foul master has racked the world. And now this. I will... 10 years, you pitiful fool. This war has not lasted 10 years, but since the beginning of time. You and I have fought 1,000 battles with the turning of the wheel. 1,000 times 1,000. And we will fight until time dies and the shadow is triumphant. He finished in a shout with a raised fist, and it was Luz Theron's turn to pull back, breath catching at the glow in the betrayer's eyes. Carefully, Luz Theron laid Ilyena down, fingers gently brushing her hair. Tears blurred his vision as he stood, but his voice was iced iron. For what else you have done, there can be no forgiveness, betrayer. But for Ilyena's death, I will destroy you beyond anything your master can repair. Prepare to... Remember, you fool. Remember your futile attack on the great Lord of the Dark? Remember his counterstroke? Remember. Even now, the 100 companions are tearing the world apart, and every day 100 men more join them. What hand slew Ilyena's son here, Kinslayer? Not mine. Not mine. What hand struck down every life that bore a drop of your blood? Everyone who loved you. Everyone you loved. Not mine, Kinslayer. Not mine. Remember, and know the price of opposing Shaitan.
Sudden sweat made tracks down Luz Theron's face through the dust and dirt. He remembered, a cloudy memory like a dream of a dream, but he knew it true. His howl beat at the walls, the howl of a man who had discovered his soul damned by his own hand, and he clawed at his face as if to tear away the sight of what he had done. Everywhere he looked, his eyes found the dead. Torn they were, or broken, or burned, or half consumed by stone. Everywhere lay lifeless faces he knew, faces he loved, old servants and friends of his childhood, faithful companions through the long years of battle. And his children, his own sons and daughters, sprawled like broken dolls, play-stilled forever, all slain by his hand. His children's faces accused him, blank eyes asking why, and his tears were no answer. Betrayer's laughter drowned out his eyes. He could not bear the faces. He could not bear to remain any longer. Desperately, he reached out to the true source, to tainted Sidene. The lake was flat and empty. The river flowed nearby, straight and broad. But he could sense there were no people within 100 leagues. He was alone as a man could be while still alive. Yet he could not escape memory. The eyes pursued him through the endless caverns of his mind. He could not hide from them. His children's eyes, Ilyena's eyes. Tears glistened on his cheeks as he turned his face to the sky. Light, forgive me. He did not believe it could come. But he shouted to the sky anyway, begged for what he could not believe he could receive. Light, forgive me. He was still touching Sidene, the power that drove the universe, that turned the wheel of time, and he could feel the oily taint fouling its surface, the taint of the shadow's counterstroke, the taint that doomed the world. Because of him. Because in his pride he had believed that men could match the Creator, could mend what the Creator had made and they had broken. In his pride he had believed. He drew on the true source deeply, still more deeply, like a man dying of thirst. Quickly he had drawn more of the one power than he could channel unaided. His skin felt as if it were aflame. Straining, he forced himself to draw more, tried to draw it all. Light, forgive me, Ilyena! The air turned to fire, the fire to light liquefied. The bolt that struck from the heavens would have seared and blinded any eye that glimpsed it, even for an instant. From the heavens it came, blazed through Luz Theron Telamon, destroyed the bowels of the earth. Stone turned to vapor at its touch. The earth thrashed and quivered like a living thing in agony. Only a heartbeat did the shining bar exist, connecting ground and sky. But even after it vanished, the earth yet heaved like the sea in a storm. Molten rock fountained 500 feet into the air, and the groaning ground rose, thrusting the burning spray ever upward, ever higher. From north and south, from east and west, the wind howled in, snapping trees like twigs, shrieking and blowing the growing mountain ever skyward. At last the wind died, the earth stilled to trembling mutters. Of Luz Theron Telamon, no sign remained. Where he had stood, a mountain now rose, miles into the sky. Molten lava still gushing from its broken peak. The broad, straight river had pushed into a curve away from the mountain. There it split to form a long island in its midst. The shadow of the mountain almost reached the island. It lay dark across the land like the ominous hand of prophecy. For a time, the dull, protesting rumbles of the earth were the only sound. On the island, the air shimmered and coalesced. The black-clad man stood staring at the fiery mountain rising out of the plain. His face twisted in rage and contempt. You cannot escape so easily, dragon. It is not done between us. It will not be done until the end of time. Then he was gone, and the mountain and the island stood alone, waiting. And the shadow fell upon the land, and the world was riven stone from stone. The oceans fled, and the mountains were swallowed up, and the nations were scattered to the 8 corners of the world. The moon was as blood, and the sun was as ashes. The seas boiled, and the living envied the dead. All was shattered, and all but memory lost. And one memory above all others, of him who brought the shadow and the breaking of the world. And him they named Dragon. From Aleph Nin Terin Alta Camora, the breaking of the world. Author unknown, the 4th age. And it came to pass in those days, as it had come before and would come again, that the dark lay heavy on the land and weighed down the hearts of men. And the green things failed, and hope died. And men cried out to the Creator, saying, O light of the heavens, light of the world, let the promised one be born of the mountain, according to the prophecies, as he was in ages past, and will be in ages to come. Let the prince of the morning sing to the land, that green things will grow, and the valleys give forth lambs. Let the arm of the Lord of the dawn shelter us from the dark, and the great sword of justice defend us. Let the dragon ride again on the winds of time. From Charal Drianan to Kalaman, the cycle of the dragon. Author unknown, the 4th age. Chapter 1, An Empty Road. The wheel of time turns, and ages come and pass, leaving memories that become legend. Legend fades to myth, and even myth is long forgotten when the age that gave it birth comes again. In one age, called the 3rd age by some, an age yet to come, an age long past, a wind grows in the mountains of mist. The wind was not the beginning. There are neither beginnings nor endings to the turning of the wheel of time, but it was a beginning. Born below the ever-cloud-capped peaks that gave the mountains their name, the wind blew east out across the sand hills, once the shore of a great ocean before the breaking of the world. Down it flailed into the 2 rivers, into the tangled forest called the Westwood, and beat at 2 men walking with a cart and horse down the rock-strewn track called the Quarry Road. For all that spring should have come a good month since, the wind carried an icy chill as if it would rather bear snow. Gusts plastered Randolph Thor's cloak to his back, whipped the earth-colored wool around his legs, then streamed it out behind him. He wished his coat were heavier, or that he had worn an extra shirt. Half the time when he tried to tug the cloak back around him, it caught on the quiver swinging at his hip. Trying to hold the cloak one-handed did not do much good anyway. He had his bow in the other, an arrow nocked and ready to draw. As a particularly strong blast tugged the cloak out of his hand, he glanced at his father over the back of the shaggy brown mare. He felt a little foolish about wanting to reassure himself that Tam was still there. But it was that kind of day. The wind howled when it rose, but aside from that, quiet lay heavy on the land. The soft creak of the axle sounded loud by comparison. No birds sang in the forest, no squirrels chittered from a branch. Not that he expected them, really. Not this spring. Only trees that kept leaf or needle through the winter had any green about them. Snarls of last year's brambles spread brown webs over stone outcrops under the trees. Nettles numbered most among the few weeds. The rest were the sorts with sharp burrs or thorns, or stinkweed, which left a rank smell on the unwary boot that crushed it. Scattered white patches of snow still dotted the ground where tight clumps of trees kept deep shade. Where sunlight did reach, it held neither strength nor warmth. The pale sun sat above the trees to the east, but its light was crisply dark, as if mixed with shadow. It was an awkward morning, made for unpleasant thoughts. Without thinking, he touched the nock of the arrow. It was ready to draw to his cheek in one smooth movement, the way Tam had taught him. Winter had been bad enough on the farms, worse than even the oldest folk remembered. Harsher still in the mountains. Wolves driven down into the 2 rivers was any guide. Wolves raided the sheep pens and chewed their way into barns to get the cattle and horses. Bears had been after the sheep too, where a bear had not been seen in years. It was no longer safe to be out after
Oh,
dark.
it's all good, Ginger
Men would
Paranormal.
gray as often as sheep, and the sun did not always have to be down.
I'm just here chilling,
Tam
listening
was
to the
taking
book.
steady strides on the other side of Bella, using his spear as a walking staff, ignoring the wind that made his brown cloak flap like a banner. Now and again he touched the mare's flank lightly to remind her to keep moving. With his thick chest and broad face, he was a pillar of reality in that morning, like a stone in the middle of a drifting dream. His sun-roughened cheeks might be lined, and his hair have only a sprinkling of black among the gray, but there was a solidness to him, as though a flood could wash around him without uprooting his feet. He stumped down the road, now impassively. Wolves and bears were all very well, his manner said, things that any man who kept sheep must be aware of. But they had best not try to stop Tam Thor getting to Emmonsfield. With a guilty start, Rand returned to watching his side of the road, Tam's matter-of-factness reminding him of his task. He was a head taller than his father, taller than anyone else in the district, and had little of Tam in him physically, except perhaps for a breadth of shoulder. Gray eyes and the reddish tinge to his hair came from his mother, so Tam said. She had been an outlander, and Rand remembered little of her aside from a smiling face, though he did put flowers on her grave every year, at Beltane in the spring, and at Sunday in the summer. 2 small casks of Tam's apple brandy rested in the lurching cart, and 8 larger barrels of apple cider, only slightly hard after a winter's curing. Tam delivered the same every year to the Wine Spring Inn for use during Beltane, and it would take more than wolves or a cold wind to stop him this spring. Even so, they had not been to the village for weeks. Not even Tam traveled much these days. But Tam had given his word
Right,
about the
Ginger
brandy and
Paranormal.
cider, even if he had waited to make delivery.
We
on the
got
day
snow a
before
little
festival.
bit. Snow pretty
Keeping his
good,
word
and
was important to Tam.
by the next day it was
Rand
already
just
pretty
glad
much
to get
all
away from the
gone.
farm. Almost as glad as about the coming of Beltane.
We
As Rand watched his side of the road,
got cold
the
today.
feeling grew in him that he was being watched. For a while he tried to shrug it off.
I think
Nothing
we're at,
moved or
let's
made a
see.
sound among the trees, except the wind. But the feeling not only persisted, it grew stronger. The hairs on his arms stirred, his skin
Well, we're at
his
about
itch on the
32.
inside. He shifted his bow irritably to rub at his arms and told himself to stop letting fancies take him. There was
Yo,
nothing
so
else
just
worth
extra
taking side of the
flavor.
road, and Tam
Hey,
would have
most
spoken if there had been
hated.
anything on the other.
How's work
He
going?
glanced over his shoulder and blinked. Not more than 20 spans back down the road, a cloaked figure on horseback followed them. Horse and rider alike black, dull, and ungleaming.
Yeah, all our snow's already
More
gone.
apparent than anything else that kept him walking backwards alongside the cart even while he looked. The rider's cloak covered him to his boot tops. The cowl tugged well forward so no part of him showed. Vaguely, Rand thought there was something odd about the horseman, but it was the shadowed opening of the hood that fascinated him. He could see only the vaguest outlines of a face, but he had the feeling he was looking right into the rider's eyes. And he could not look away. Queasiness settled in his stomach,
Oh shit, so it might be an early night, huh?
but he felt hatred as sharply as if he could see a snarling face. Hatred for everything that lived. Hatred for him, most of all. For him above all things. Abruptly, a stone caught his heel, and he stumbled, breaking his eyes away from the dark horseman. His bow dropped to the road, and only an outthrust hand grabbing Bella's harness saved him from falling flat on his back. With a startled snort, the mare stopped, twisting her head to see what had caught her. Tam frowned over Bella's back at him. "Are you all right, lad?" "A rider," Rand said breathlessly, pulling himself upright. "A stranger following us." "Where?" The older man lifted his broad-bladed spear and peered back warily. "There, down the..." Rand's words trailed off as he turned to point. The road behind was empty.
Alright, that'd be nice.
Disbelieving, he stared into the forest on both sides of the road. Bare-branched trees offered no hiding place, but there was not a glimmer of horse or horseman. He met his father's questioning gaze. He was there. A man in a black cloak, on a black horse. "I wouldn't doubt your word, lad. But where has he gone?" "I don't know. But he was there." He stood with a bow and arrow, hastily checked the fletching before re-knocking, and half drew before letting the bowstring relax. There was nothing to aim at. He was. Tam shook his grizzled head. If you say so, lad. Come on, then. A horse leaves hoof prints.
I'm not watching nothing. I'm listening to a book.
His cloak whipping. If we find them, we'll know for a fact he was there. If not,
Oh shit.
well, these are days to make a man think he's seeing things.
Yeah, they just ended up switching
Abruptly,
books.
Rand
Ginger
realized what had
Paranormal.
been odd about the horseman, aside from his being there at all.
No, it'd be at
The wind
10:30.
challenged him, and not so much as shifted a fold of that black cloak. His mouth was suddenly dry. He must have imagined it. His father was right. This was a morning to prickle a man's imagination. But he did not believe it. Only, how did he tell his father that the man who had apparently vanished into air wore a cloak the wind did not touch? With a worried frown, he peered into the woods around them. It looked different than it ever had before. Almost since he was old enough to walk, he had run loose in the forest. The ponds and streams of Riverwood, beyond the last farms east of Emmons Field, were where
Some
you
of the
went to
books I
swim.
have actually sound like you're watching a movie.
Which many in the Two Rivers
Actually,
said
some of the
was
ones that are on the liver
and
box that I
even
got
gone to the very foot
they're
of the
actually
mountains of mist.
voiced by
Him and his
different
closest friends,
people
Matt
throughout the whole book.
Coffin, Perrin Ibarra. There was a lot further afield than people in Emmons Field ever went. To them, a journey to the next village, up to Watch Hill or down to Devon Ride, was a big event. Nowhere in all of that had he found a place that made him afraid. Today, though, the Westwood was not the place he remembered. A man who could disappear so suddenly could reappear just as suddenly, maybe even right beside them. No, Father, there's no need. When Tam stopped in surprise, Rand covered his flush by tugging at the hood of his cloak. You're probably right. No point looking for what isn't there.
And on this one, I
How
think it's
would you
only
use to try getting onto the village and out of this
two
land?
different narrators that are on this one.
I could do with a pipe, Tam said slowly, and a mug of ale where it's warm.
Hell yeah, Ginger Paranormal. Thanks for stopping by. Hope you have a good evening or good night.
Rand
I'll
managed a
be
weak smile.
right back.
Of all things he
Gotta
might
go
want
check
to
on the
think
dogs
about
real
right
quick.
then, the mayor's daughter was far down the list. He did not need any more confusion. For the past year, she had been making him increasingly jittery whenever they were together. Worse, she did not even seem to be aware of it. No, he certainly did not want to add Egwene to his thoughts. He was hoping his father had not noticed he was afraid when Tam said, "Remember the flame, lad, and the void." It was an odd thing Tam had taught him. Concentrate on a single flame and feed all your passions into it. Fear, hate, anger, until your mind became empty. Become one with the void, Tam said, and you could do anything. Nobody else in Emmons Field talked that way, but Tam won the archery competition at Beltane every year with his flame and his void. Rand thought he might have a chance of placing this year himself, if he could manage to hold on to the void. For Tam to bring it up now meant he had noticed, but he said nothing more about it. Tam clucked Bella into motion once more, and they resumed their journey, the older man striding along as if nothing untoward had happened, and nothing untoward could. Rand wished he could imitate him. He tried forming the emptiness in his mind, but it kept slipping away into images of the black-cloaked horseman. He wanted to believe that Tam was right, that the rider had just been his imagination, but he could remember that feeling of hatred too well. There had been someone, and that someone had meant him harm. He did not stop looking back until the high-peaked, thatched roofs of the field surrounded him. The village lay close onto the Westwood, the forest gradually thinning until the last few trees stood actually among the stout frame houses. The land sloped gently down to the east. Though not without patches of woods, farms and hedge-bordered fields and pastures quilted the land beyond the village, all the way to the Waterwood and its tangle of streams and ponds. The land to the west was just as fertile, and the pastures there lush in most years, but only a handful of farms could be found in the Westwood. Even those few dwindled to none miles short of the sand hills, not to mention the mountains of mist, which rose above the Westwood treetops, distant but in plain sight from Emmons Field. Some said the land was too rocky, as if there were not rocks everywhere in the Two Rivers, and others said it was hard luck land. A few muttered that there was no point getting any closer to the mountains than needs be. Whatever the reasons, only the hardiest men farmed in the Westwood. Small children and dogs dodged around the cart in whooping swarms once it passed the first row of houses. Bella plodded on patiently, ignoring the yelling youngsters who tumbled under her nose, playing tag and rolling hoops. In the last months, there had been little of play or laughter from the children. Even when the weather had slackened enough to let children out, fear of wolves kept them in. It seemed the approach of Beltane had taught them how to play again. Festival had affected the adults as well. Broad shutters were thrown back, and in almost every house the good wife stood in a window, apron tied about her, and long braided hair done up in a kerchief, shaking sheets or hanging mattresses over the windowsills. Whether or not leaves had appeared on the trees, no woman would let Beltane come before her spring cleaning was done. In every yard, rugs hung from stretched lines, and children, who had not been quick enough to run free in the streets, instead vented their frustration on the carpets with wicker beaters. On roof after roof, the goodman of the house clambered about, checking the thatch to see if the winter's damage meant calling on old Sen Bowie, the thatcher. Several times Tam paused to engage one man or another in brief conversation. Since he and Rand had not been off the farm for weeks, everyone wanted to catch up on how things were out that way. Few Westwood men had been in. Tam spoke of damage from winter storms, each one worse than the one before, and stillborn lambs, of brown fields where crops should be sprouting and pastures greening, of ravens flocking in where songbirds had come in years before. Grim talk, with preparations for Beltane going on all around them, and much shaking of heads. It was the same on all sides. Most of the men rolled their shoulders and said, "Well, we'll survive, the light willing." Some grinned and added, "And if the light doesn't will, we'll still survive." That was the way of most Two Rivers people. People who had to watch the hail beat their crops or the wolves take their lambs and start over, no matter how many years it happened, did not give up easily. Most of those who did were long since gone. Tam would not have stopped for Whit Conger if the man had not come out into the street, so they had to halt or let Bella run him over. The Congers and the Coplans, the two families were so intermarried no one really knew where one family led off and the other began, were known from Watch Hill to Devon Ride, and maybe as far as Tarrant Ferry, as complainers and troublemakers. "I have to give this to Bran Elvire, Whit," Tam said, nodding to the barrels in the cart. But the scrawny man held his ground with a sour expression on his face. He had been sprawled on his front steps, not up on his roof, though the thatch looked as if it badly needed Master Bowie's attention. He never seemed ready to start over or to finish what he started the first time. Most of the Coplans and Congers were like that, those who were not worse. "What are we going to do about Nynaeve, Althor?" Conger demanded. "We can't have a wisdom like that for Emmons Field." Tam sighed heavily. "It's not our place, Whit. The wisdom is women's business." "Well, we'd better do something, Althor. She said we'd have a mild winter and a good harvest. Now you ask her what she hears in the wind, and she just scowls at you and stomps off." "If you asked her the way you usually do, Whit," Tam said patiently, "you're lucky she didn't thump you with that stick she carries. Now, if you don't mind, this brandy. Nynaeve Almira is just too young to be a wisdom, Althor. If the women's circle won't do something, then the village council has to." "What business of yours is the wisdom, Whit Conger?" roared a woman's voice. Whit flinched as his wife marched out of the house. Days Conger was twice as wide as Whit, a hard-faced woman without an ounce of fat on her. She glared at him with her fists on her hips. "You try meddling in women's circle business and see how you like eating your own cooking, which you won't do in my kitchen, and washing your own clothes and making your own bed, which won't be under my roof." "But, Days," Whit whined, "I was just—" "If you'll pardon me, Days," Tam said. "Whit, the light shine on you both." He got Bella moving again, leading her around the scrawny fellow. Days was concentrating on her husband now, but any minute she could realize whom it was Whit had been talking to. That was why they had not accepted any of the invitations to stop for a bite to eat or something hot to drink. When they saw Tam, the Goodwives of Emmonsfield went on point like hounds spotting a rabbit. There was not one of them who did not know just the perfect wife for a widower with a good farm, even if it was in the Westwood. Rand stepped along just as quickly as Tam, perhaps even more so. He was sometimes cornered when Tam was not around, with no way to escape outside of rudeness. Herded onto a stool by the kitchen fire, he would be fed pastries or honey cakes or meat pies. And always the Goodwife's eyes weighed and measured him as neatly as any merchant's scales and tapes, while she told him that what he was eating was not nearly so good as her widowed sister's cooking or her next to eldest cousin's. Tam was certainly not getting any younger, she would say. It was good that he had loved his wife so. It boded well for the next woman in his life. But he had mourned long enough. Tam needed a good woman. It was a simple fact, she would say, or something very close, that a man just could not do without a woman to take care of him and keep him out of trouble. Worst of all were those who paused thoughtfully at about that point, then asked with elaborate casualness exactly how old he was now. Like most Two Rivers folk, Rand had a strong, stubborn streak. Outsiders sometimes said it was the prime trait of people in the Two Rivers that they could give mules lessons and teach stones. The Goodwives were fine and kindly women for the most part, but he hated being pushed into anything, and they made him feel as if he were being prodded with sticks. So he walked fast and wished Tam would hurry Bella along. Soon the street opened onto the green, a broad expanse in the middle of the village. Usually covered with thick grass, the green this spring showed only a few fresh patches among the yellowish brown of dead grass and the black of bare earth. A double handful of geese waddled about, beadily eyeing the ground, but not finding anything worth pecking, and someone had tethered a milk cow to crop the sparse growth.
Alright, everyone, I'm going to call into this live for right now. I want to thank everyone for stopping by and everyone who keeps stopping by. Till next time, everyone. Hobos come out.